Hello, I'm Dr. Keith Martin, the Executive Director of the Consortium of Universities for Global Health here in Washington, D.C. We all know food security is absolutely vital to everybody's health, but we also know that food security is under threat. And we're going to be seeing an increase of 2 billion people on our planet in the years to come, in a planet that's already stressed. So, how do we enable individuals around the world to be able to have access to quality nutrition in a sustainable way? That's a vexing question. But today, we're very lucky to have an extraordinary person who is leading efforts and have been implementing ways to actually enable communities to have sustainable food production. So it's a great honor to have David Vanderpool here with us today. He is the founder and CEO of the International Development Extension Agency. And David and his teams have been doing work in over 45 countries around the world, and they've been doing it for more than 25 years. So he has a lot to say, and his work is really innovative. David, welcome to our discussion today.
Dr. Martin, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Great. Well, now the first thing, of course, we have to ask is, how did you get into this? Because I think people will be fascinated by your story.
Absolutely. Well, I was working in disaster relief settings, actually with my father, Dr. Dave Vanderpool, and his organization, which does a lot of medical disaster relief and development work around the world. And I saw how hunger magnifies every crisis. Patients would receive life-saving care and then fail to heal because of malnutrition. I also saw how imported food, while helpful in the short term, can often undermine local farmers and producers. So I returned to school, studied international agricultural development, founded IDEA, the International Development Extension Agency, and dedicated my work to empowering farmers and local systems to feed their communities and with the dignity that farmers deserve.
And that's important. As the agency is so important, being able to do that. And a good chunk of the world does rely on subsistence farming. So there's a real value
Mhm.
proposition to that, isn't there?
I certainly think so. Yes, sir. Everyone's got to eat.
Absolutely. So let's break it down for our audience into the component parts. What are the key inputs into food security?
So at IDEA, we define food security using three main pillars. We look at food availability, food accessibility, and food affordability. So availability is how much food is present at a specific point in time, and looking at the quantity of food available. Accessibility is whether households can get food consistently throughout the year, not just post-harvest when supplies are high. And then affordability, we look at whether consumers can afford to buy the food, but also if farmers can sell it at a viable price. Their expenses for seeds, fertilizer, labor, etc., is that going to drive up their prices above what the market's willing to pay, or they have to sell for a loss, or will they make a profit? So therefore, their food affordability as well. And then crossing those three pillars, we kind of look at this as a Venn diagram where the three overlap is food security, but then where two will overlap, we look at food quality and safety, dietary diversity, and food preservation. So the food remains safe, nutritious, and present year round.
Uh, And can you just also, as an extension of that, where do you see some of the key gaps and breakdowns in smallholder farmers being able to do that? Because I'll not name the country, which is a very country rich agriculturally, but has a high level of stunting. And
No, yes, sir.
I asked the Minister of Health, how is that possible? She says, look, I'm not sure. I'm trying to get answers to that. So what do you see from your vantage point?
Well, to directly look at stunting, kwashiorkor and marasmus are some of the most common causes of stunting in youth due to lack of protein, lack of calories. That was actually one of the impetuses for me to get into this was witnessing that firsthand. And often that lack of quantity of protein or calories, comes from a lack of quantity of just food in general, which is often caused by post-harvest produce losses. And this post-harvest losses destroy value, after the harvest, but before it can be consumed. In many places, the majority of a harvest is lost due to rot, pests, or falling off the wagon, literally, before it makes it to market. the majority of the harvest is often lost. I mean, that statistic in many countries, it's up to 60%. How do you overcome that lack of quantity of food when the farmers work so hard to produce it? It doesn't make it to to the mouth, to the stomach of the consumer. And so mitigating post-harvest produce loss is an important issue to overcome. Second, I would say underdeveloped markets often exploit farmers, blocking them from the buyers, the consumers, and preventing their access to fair prices. Farmers often are unable to reach the markets directly, and so they sell to a middleman. And that farm gate price, the price they sell it at the front gate, is always just rock bottom, minuscule, and the middleman, who is simply transporting it to market, it takes a huge cut. It makes huge overhead. And so the inability to access the markets that are not developed well with the producer and the consumer as the focus. And then third, that last mile delivery of knowledge, of know-how is inconsistent. We have incredible research institutions around the world at universities and at different facilities, but it often doesn't make it out of the ivory tower and down the long, dirty, bumpy road to the farmer where they can implement these practices into their daily routines. So I'd say those three: post-harvest produce loss, underdeveloped markets, and then the last mile delivery of knowledge, the big gaps preventing developed food security.
So if you were a prime minister or president of a country where you saw these losses, right, and your your citizens are really having an unacceptable level, well, any level is unacceptable, but you're seeing malnutrition in your population, and you're seeing a lack of value. How would you resolve, or can you share with us some of the work that you and IDEA are doing in terms of being able to reduce post-harvest loss or being able to improve farmers' access to markets so they get a fair price? That is a
Mhm.
staggering figure, right? 60% loss, and then the value proposition to farmers are getting just a minuscule amount of what that harvest is actually worth.
Yes, sir. You're absolutely right. And if a minister of agriculture or president, prime minister really wants to tackle this, in my not very humble opinion, I would say it comes down to farmer empowerment. The farmers must be equipped with knowledge so that they can make the informed decisions required to maximize their productivity, their efficiency, their effectiveness, minimize their costs and expenses and wastes so that there is more food availability, accessibility, affordability, because that is going to resonate throughout the communities and the country as a whole. So I have found knowledge, training, farmer field schools has the greatest impact and the greatest, bang for your buck. It's going to be the best ROI. In a previous life, I served with the U.S. Army in Afghanistan as an agricultural development officer, and we would build these great, expensive infrastructures that would then get blown up. And that didn't have much longevity. But the farmer training is, in their minds, in the communities, and that has that long-term multiplicative effect that resonates for the long term.
Which can be passed on from generation to generation.
Exactly. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I want to get into a little shift in terms of about the issue of quality, which you mentioned, which is so important, right? And we've reduced the biodiversity in terms of our foodstuffs as time has passed, which is a real loss, isn't it?
Mhm.
And I don't know if you have any thoughts in terms of how we can increase the diversity in terms of the species that are the diversity of what we're consuming in terms of the species diversity. Do you have any thoughts on that? Because that is not only important, I think, for nutrition, but it's also important from a biodiversity perspective since we're in a sixth extinction crisis right now.
Absolutely. Yes, sir. Whew. To push the policy of a diverse nutritional agriculture sector, there's a lot of politics that goes into that, but there's also just got to be the prioritization of that.
Mhm.
Farming is a business, and if farmers are going to make the best money, they need to be growing the cash crops. If everyone's growing the same cash crop, you get more of a monocrop instead of having that diversity. And so how do you make that an enforced policy? I don't know. But what I do know is that when it comes to a smart business, especially an agribusiness, you do want to have your investments spread out, not have all your eggs in one basket. And so if farmers are not monocropping, but are having a good intercropping or diversity of their fields, they are going to be able to mitigate their losses when a pest or disease or climate shock comes. And then they will also be injecting into the local market a diversity of crops. Now, one problem that I have seen is that too often ministries of agriculture will push a certain crop as kind of the silver bullet of, hey, cassava has calories. Everyone grow cassava. It grows really easily. And then you have all these unforeseen repercussions that come out of that very toxic, high in cyanide crop that kills thousands of people a year from cyanide toxicity. Why don't we grow something that's more nutritious, something that actually has benefit, like legumes? We are always advocating for greater bean cultivation amongst our participants because it has protein. I like protein. Everyone needs protein to grow. Going back to kwashiorkor, we've got to have protein in our diets, and animal-based protein can occasionally be too cost prohibitive for a lot of these low-income communities. And so we've published resources on cultivating pigeon peas, a very drought tolerant, high yield legume that gets more protein in the diet. And so, how do we get more of that nutritional diversity? It comes from having the food accessibility of a greater diversity and the food availability, that is going to have sufficient amounts. That's how we find it works best.
Yeah. David, and I can just tell folks that they can look at your website, idea.org, where you can find that excellent book that you've written, and a lot of
It's
other.
idea.ag. Yes, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you so
Idea.ag.
much for
Oh,
the plug.
bite my tongue. There you go. This is now people are going to remember this, right? For sure.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Um, so indigenous knowledge is so vitally important, but we're losing it. How do we capture that knowledge, David, and how do we enable it to be deployed and used more effectively?
Great question. Going back to my stories from Afghanistan, that was something that we found a lot. That prior to 1980, Afghanistan was a great agriculture sector.
Mhm.
They had a great ag sector. And then you had the Soviet invasion, and so many people fled to Iran and Pakistan. Their children grew up in refugee camps, and their grandkids came back home, and they had lost that institutional knowledge. And so they were starting from scratch, so to speak. And so I was some, young hothead out of grad school thinking that I knew everything when I was over there. But what I found was if we could get the knowledge from the grandparents and get it down into this current generation, it was going to be so much more appropriate. Now, looking at community development, so often in the traditional method, organizations go in and they do needs-based development. What does this community need? We're going to provide it. And it's very savior complex, and it might get the job done in the short term, but it doesn't develop the local assets. And that's where when you couple that with the asset-based community development and you recognize what is the institutional knowledge that can be built upon, what are the strengths that this community has that can be, built up even further. And then you do inject what lacks. You look at those gaps and you recognize that needs based is relevant to a degree. Then you're really able to have, the full equation and see the institutional knowledge not just maintained, but built upon as the foundation for a healthy community. That works very well.
Yeah. And you're really tapping into also the local knowledge about geography, right? And
Hmm.
the geological formations that you have. And one input we haven't spoken about yet, which is obviously crucial to crop development, is water and water
Yes, sir.
security. And I think people, I honestly believe we pay so little attention to this issue that is essential for our life in general. Do you have any, does IDEA work on water sustainability, freshwater sustainability at all? And if so, can you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, we have done a lot of water work, and I actually like to couple it with the different wash programs that many of our partners will have. And everyone likes to look at the water and sanitation and hygiene, thinking of that from a purely, individual human perspective. Like that applies to our food production as well. We've got to have water for the crops, and we need to harvest our crops, with a sanitary practice that helps that post-harvest produce loss mitigation. And if we store our food well, we have good hygienic practices, it'll last longer. And so wash really fits into food security, just like it does with healthcare and community health. But then from the water perspective, looking at irrigation, so much of water is lost due to leakage, seepage, and evaporation. And so when we are transporting water from a well or a river or whatever body we have to the field, there are so many simple practices we can put in place that will maximize the delivery of that water to its final destination, so it's not lost to the air, lost to the canal, lost to the surrounding soil, whatever it may be. And so yes, sir, we do a lot of irrigation work, looking at drip irrigation so that's more efficient, looking at there are the traditional methods of like kind of a flood and drain, which are easy from a labor perspective, but hard from a productivity perspective. And so a lot of training on what are the best practices for irrigation to maximize our water efficiency. And I will
And
say also, sorry,
no,
go
please,
ahead.
no, please, go ahead.
Kind of on that end, we look at how do the different climate shocks regarding water affect our farmers and training our farmers to be more resilient. If we are dealing with increased raining, so lots of flooding, how can we develop contours within our fields to aid in the drainage and have different drainage ditches? If we're dealing with droughts and lack of water, how can we use, zye holes or different uh, crescent pits around our plants to maximize all of the water straight to the roots. And so many different techniques and practices we train our farmers on for specifically water-based issues.
And we spoke about the importance of an evolution in agricultural practices in terms of reducing biodiversity losses. But can you expand a little bit on the climate change area, David? Because it's obviously, if agriculture is done well, they're also important and powerful carbon sinks that are natural carbon sinks that can pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and lock that into the soil. Can you share anything about a little bit more about the how an evolution in agriculture can actually be a powerful tool to adapting and mitigating against climate change?
Absolutely. Yes, sir. And so reforestation is one of the side projects that I like to always introduce in any of our programming. In Haiti, where I lived and worked for oh, 5+ years in the field, so many of the hillsides were completely deforested due to myriad of issues, but are going over centuries. And so whenever I would go out to do extension services with the local farmers, I would always take a big old rice sack full of tree seeds, of specifically Moringa oleifera seeds, and would just Johnny Appleseed scatter them everywhere I went. And over the course of 5 years, those hillsides were reforested, which has so many beneficial issues from erosion, protecting the water table, but then also carbon sinking. Truly, nothing is really better at carbon sinking than trees and agroforestry. Also, finding ways to build bridges between farmers and the different carbon credit institutions. So often there's all this great conversation at the global level on carbon credits, and the farmers rarely ever have access to those. And so it doesn't make it, once again, that final mile. But then, really, when it comes to climate change, important conversation. I'm so glad so many people are having it. But what we try to focus on at IDEA is how do we train farmers to be more climate resilient? That's just the avenue that we're going down. Other people can have the policy discussions. I want to make sure that these farmers are able to respond, react, but then even more importantly, be proactive to The rains might not come at the same time traditionally this year as they have previous years. What can I do to prepare for that? The rains might be more intense, the rains might be less intense. Whatever it may be, how can we plan ahead so that come what may, we don't just survive, but we thrive? And that climate smart agriculture, that resilience training empowers our farmers to be productive regardless of the situation.
And I think, David, it's a wonderful segue into not only the health benefits, but also the economic benefits that this is that smallholder farming is a really important part of local economies that is the employment of many communities. So perhaps you could share with us a little bit more of what IDEA does, because you really, the organization that you founded is really doing, very important grassroots work with communities to address all of the problems and challenges we've just mentioned and the solutions that you've offered. Um, and you've also using data as a tool
Mhm.
that enables them to use data in a very powerful way to achieve those goals. So could you share with us a little bit more explicitly about what IDEA is doing with NGOs, with local communities to improve food security?
Absolutely. So, IDEA, we offer a number of different services. One of our big ones is we have it's called our Harvesting Impact Food Security Program Design Masterclass. And we take organizations through this course, training them to co-design their program's playbook that aligns the climate smart agronomy, nutrition, market access with clear outcome targets. We have a textbook, Improving Agricultural Impact, empowering INGOs to establish and enhance their food security program. Because what we found is so often there are great groups in the field with great intentions, but without clear, focused goals. And so they have a bunch of scattered agriculture projects that are not working in the same direction. They're not working towards a desired outcome, or even better, working towards long-term impact. And so we built this master class in program design. We have a workbook that goes along with it so that organizations can really build out the program start to finish with all of the indicators built out, all the best practices, whatever their goals, they're well set. And what we find is this is helping them have the greater impact in the field, empowering the farmers to improve their community's food security. The organizations are using their donations, their funds, more intentionally, more specifically, more efficiently. And so that's one of our main services. Uh, Additionally, many of these organizations then contract IDEA as a fractional program director to run these food security and ag programs because they often lack the staff with the technical expertise to run this. What we try to do is set a time frame for these fractional services so that we can be training our replacement and these organizations can be independent, because that's what we're really working towards: independent farmers, independent communities, and independent INGOs.
David, are governments, ministries of agriculture, are they engaging you in this effort so they can integrate some of your work that's relevant to them and their agricultural policies? Because it seems to me that, government is the most important actor in delivering public goods, and the power you can have if you bring them on site is huge. So, are they engaging you in this? Are you able to engage them in affecting their policy decisions?
Absolutely, yes, sir. And that's one of our other major services is we do professional development and continuing education for the ministries of agriculture and their agriculture extension agents.
Hmm.
We've done this in a number of countries. We've seen great effect because you're absolutely right. No one is going to invest more in their own people than the government, of the people. INGOs may come and go, but the country is going to be there long term. And that's who we, like you said, we want that independence. We want them to be taking care of themselves, feeding themselves. And oftentimes there's just that lack of opportunity for the training or the knowledge. We also publish a weekly national agriculture report where we deliver timely, relevant, and beneficial farming advice. We have tens of thousands of farmers, specifically in Uganda, who read this weekly. And we localize markets by publishing prices. And we also share this with the Ministry of Agriculture, and we're using this as training with their ag extension agents. We're looking to scale this to other countries. And so it's once again, you were talking about that data. We aggregate data across 32 different cities in Uganda, looking at the market prices. We do a lot of results-based surveying and assessing of our readers to find out what benefits them the most and the impact that this knowledge is having on the informed decision making they're able to conduct with, with this data.
What do you find benefits them the most, David? What have they told you that benefits the most? Because that's really an extraordinary list of products that IDEA produces that are really practical.
So in the weekly ag report, one of the things is we publish it every week, and so it's very timely knowledge, and some of it is weather forecasting. And we break it down by every region and sub-region in the country so that if you're a farmer in this sub-region, you know the weather that's coming specifically for you. But then we also prognosticate on what that farmer in that region should do based on this weather and the crop calendar, what stage of cultivation they're in. And the farmers that we surveyed, they said that they had a 10% increase in their harvest because they applied the advice and planted earlier based on the rain patterns that were different than usual. Then they were first to market because they planted first, harvested first, got to market first, and had a 15% price point increase because they beat the rest of the supply, and they were able to capture that demand. And so the market price is knowing, do I go to market A and get $1 a kilo, or market B and get $2 a kilo, but market B is twice as far? Let me make that decision based on my information. But then also the weather forecasting and what should I do based on the crops I'm growing, the stage of cultivation I'm in, and what tomorrow is going to look like. That has helped the farmers in incredible ways.
Fantastic. I can ask you one more question before I turn it over to you for last word, David. And it's got, again, it's just got to do with seeds and seed quality and seed diversity.
Mm.
Do, how are farmers in lower resource areas, do they, how would they get the seeds that would be most productive to them?
That is a great question. And access to quality inputs. You said, what are the three gaps I see in food security? That would probably be number four, because having access to quality seeds is oftentimes challenging. INGOs can help bridge that gap and help be a supplier or at least a transporter of quality seeds to rural areas. Ministries of Agriculture are often working in that, but there are so many roadblocks. We teach seed saving to many of our farmers. So once they get access to quality seeds, as long as they're more of an heirloom variety instead of hybrid, then they can save those seeds and be able to propagate them year after year. But you have to have access to begin with. And so there's got to be, once again, that last mile delivery, connecting the high quality seeds that have been researched and bred and developed in the laboratory to the actual field where they can be grown.
Oh, that's a vexing challenge, but one that with coordination we can do, right?
Absolutely, yes,
Fantastic.
sir.
Well, before I have thank you, but are there any last words that you want to share with our audience who have learned so much, I'm sure, as I have from this wonderful intervention and discussion with you? Any last words of advice on how we can have a more secure and nutritious future for all?
Well, to the folks at Q, I just want to say food security is health security, and your work in global health is so admirable. And I see our work in food security as complementary to what y'all are looking to achieve. If we can align our, agronomy, extension, markets, nutrition, et cetera, with the communities where we're working, we can make meaningful gains. We can have meaningful impact that empowers those communities for the long term. And so
Well,
let's
that's
grow.
a great way to end, David. And um, food security is health security, as you so poignantly said. And I really want to thank you at idea.ag for all of what you're doing to address this really vital challenge that affects everybody in the world. And also you're continuing. I'm going to do this shameful plug to your dad's book, David Vanderpool,
Yes.
Doing Good Well, a Best Practices Guide to Humanitarian Missions. There's so much wisdom in that, as there is so much wisdom in your book and your products. And I just encourage folks to go to idea.ag, take a look at them, and those are really they're wonderful practical guides that you have created, David, with your teams. And I just want to thank you very much for doing that and joining us today on the Consortium of Universities for Global Health's Global Health Leader Series. And for all of the folks who are watching, we're having a virtual Global Health Week, December 2nd to 4th. It's open to all and it's free. So you just have to sign up, cugh.org. You'll find the information on the sessions. And then please come to our conference in April 9th to the 12th in Washington, D.C., where David Vanderpool will be there, and hopefully he'll be Dr. David Vanderpool because he's working on his PhD. So you'll join the family list of Dr. Vanderpool, Dr. David Vanderpools, and you'll get to meet David there. So thanks very much, David, for your time, and we wish you the very best in the future.
Dr. Martin, thank you so very much. Really appreciate y'all.
Take care.
You too.